All right, y'all, we are going to get started today with the lovely and wonderful quadratic formula. So follow along in your lesson 2.7 notes. These will stay in your binder to refer back. We're going to look first at what is the solution to a quadratic equation. We have quite a few words for this. Solution also means x-intercept. It also is roots. Solution or x-intercepts, they all mean the same thing. It's where the function or where the quadratic function touches or crosses the x-axis. So we're looking for the points where our U-shaped quadratic function, which looks something like this, we're looking for where it touches or crosses that x-axis. Those are our solutions to a quadratic equation. Now there's a couple ways that we can find this. One of them is graphing, and one is our very, very favorite quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all of that over 2a. Reminder that this is based on our standard form of a quadratic equation, which we worked on last class, which looks like this: y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is the value in front of x squared, b is the value in front of x, and c is the value with no variable attached to it. So those are where those b's, a's, and c's are coming from in this quadratic formula. So first we want to talk about the discriminant. The discriminant is this part of the quadratic formula that is under the square root, but does not include the square root. So notice it's just the b squared minus 4ac that is under the square root. Now the discriminant can tell us a few things about the type of solutions or the number of solutions. So here, if our discriminant is positive, it means that we have two real solutions. Okay, means we have two real solutions. So an example of that graphically would look something like this, where our solutions, there's one solution, here's another. So in total, here are our two solutions. There are two places where the function touches or crosses the x-axis because the u or function is below the x-axis. So here, when our discriminant is positive, when this piece under the square root is positive, it means we have two solutions or two x-intercepts. Okay. The second type or second thing that the discriminant can tell us, if the discriminant is 0, so if we plug b squared minus 4ac into our calculator and get 0, then there is one real solution, or we also say two equal solutions. So two of the same solutions. Okay. When we're looking at a graph, what that's going to look like is a single vertex or a single x-intercept where just the vertex is touching the x-axis. So here we have one solution. And then finally, if our discriminant is negative, then we have no real solutions, or two imaginary solutions. Okay. This is when our vertex is above the x-axis. So there's no place where we are touching or crossing the x-axis. There are no x-intercepts, so there are no real solutions. Okay. Now we've seen what this looks like on a graph. Let's also see what this looks like in equations. So what the directions say here is find the value of the discriminant. Remember, the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. It's that piece of the quadratic formula that's under the square root. And then based on the value of the discriminant, we're going to say how many solutions we have. So I'm going to start by labeling my a, b, and c values. Here, if there's no number in front of x squared, I'm going to call it a 1. So a equals 1, b equals -2. Be careful to take that negative with you. And c equals 1. So I'm going to plug that into my b squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to do -2. Reminder, a negative number, oops, can't see that, can you? Reminder that a negative number has got to be inside of parentheses for us to square it. So -2 minus 4 times our a value, which is 1, times our c value, which again is 1. So I'm going to take that and plug that entire thing into my calculator, hoping that you can actually see this calculator. And I'm going to type in exactly as I see it, parentheses. Oh, you can't see that, can you? -2. Forgot how to dim the screen. -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. I don't know if you can see that. Kind of. Yep, look, there it is. I can't remember how to dim the screen. My bad. And then I'm going to press enter, and that gives me 0. So the value of my discriminant is 0. And then because the discriminant is 0, I have one real solution. The equation of my graph would look, or the graph of my equation would look something like this. So because my discriminant is 0, I have one real solution. We're going to do the same thing with these other two, again labeling our a, b, and c values. So here a is 1, it's the number in front of x squared. If there's nothing there, we write in an imaginary 1. b is -3, and c is 10. Again, going to plug that into my b squared minus 4ac, the discriminant. So I get -3 squared minus 4 times my a value of 1 times my c value of 10. And I'm going to plug that in my calculator, -3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 10. Just be really careful about your parentheses on these. When I press enter, I get -31. So my discriminant is -31. Because the discriminant is negative, I have no real solutions. The graph of my quadratic would look something like this. And then on this very last one, good thing I have one more color left. We're just looking at the discriminant, which is our b squared minus 4ac. I'm going to label my a as 1, b is 6, and c is 5. So when I plug that in, I get 6 squared minus 4 times a times c. Plug that into my calculator, 6 squared minus 4 times a times c. That gives me positive 16. So if my discriminant is positive, so because the discriminant is positive, there are two real solutions. Okay, so that's it for the discriminant. What we want to look at next, the discriminant tells us how many solutions there are, but it does not tell us the specific value of the solutions. That's what the full quadratic formula is for. So we're going to go through an example next of the full quadratic formula and use the discriminant to make some smart decisions. So if you flip to the back of your guided notes, you should see this here. You've got quadratic formula at the top. Reminder, this full formula, this piece of the formula, sorry, I just leaned closer, it probably got really loud there. This piece of the formula is called the discriminant. Okay, but the entire quadratic formula, so the entire quadratic formula, that tells us the actual solutions. Whereas the discriminant just tells us how many solutions. So now we're going to find the actual solutions. So we've got this equation 2x squared plus 5x equals 9. I know that this is a quadratic because our highest exponent is 2. My first step is to set the equation equal to 0. So I have 2x squared plus 5x equals 9. So to set this equal to 0, I need to move this 9 from one side of the equation to the other. So I'm going to draw a line, subtract 9 on both sides. Negative 9 can't combine with either of these terms because they both have variables and 9 doesn't. So that leaves me with 2x squared plus 5x minus 9 equals 0. Okay, so now that I've got set it equal to 0, I can actually start solving this. Next thing it tells me to do is identify a, b, and c. I know that those are my variable or my numbers in front of each variable. A is equal to 2, b is equal to 5, and c is equal to negative 9. I've identified my a, b, and c values. Next, I'm going to determine the value of the discriminant so that I know how many solutions I have. So I'm going to do the discriminant first. Remember, the discriminant is what's underneath that square root. So my discriminant is just b squared minus 4ac. So I'm going to use my a, b, and c values and plug it into this discriminant. So that's going to give me 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 9. Again, just plugging in my a, b, and c values into this piece of the quadratic formula. I'm going to plug that in my calculator. I get 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 9. And when I plug that in my calculator, I get 97. So when I plug that in my calculator, I get 97. My discriminant here is positive. So a positive discriminant means there are 2 real solutions. So I should get 2 answers at the end of this. Okay, so now I've found this piece of my quadratic formula. I found the discriminant. Now I've got to plug in the rest of the values. I've got to plug it back into the original formula. So here it says substitute a, b, and the value of the discriminant into the quadratic formula. So I'm going to start here. I know that b is 5, so I'm going to write the full formula. X equals negative b. I have a positive 5 here, but the formula says negative, so this becomes negative 5 plus or minus the square root. Now, reminder that underneath the square root is the discriminant, which we've already found a value for. So I'm going to take my value of the discriminant and put it underneath that square root. All of that over 2 times the value of a, which is 2. Now from here, I'm just going to simplify. Notice that there's a plus and a minus here. That means that there are 2 possible solutions. One where I'm adding negative 5 to the discriminant, one where I'm subtracting negative 5 from the discriminant, which matches with our answer here, knowing that we have 2 real solutions. So what I always do is I split this up into 2. So we're finishing our simplify and solve for the x values. So I have one where it's negative 5 plus the square root of 97 over 4. And then one answer that is negative 5 minus the square root of 97 over 4, because 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, so we're simplifying. We have one answer where we're subtracting negative 5 from the discriminant, one answer where we are adding 5 to the discriminant. Now from here, this is a perfectly acceptable way to leave your answers. You can also simplify them to decimals. So I could do negative 5 plus the square root of 97, all of that over 4. Press enter on my calculator and I should get 1.21221. So what was that? 1.21221. Okay? Either of those are completely correct answers. You can leave it like this, or you can plug it into your calculator to get a decimal. Now, quadratic formula is a little bit tricky because there's a lot of plugging in, and there's a lot of little places where we can drop negatives or things like that. So just be really, really careful in your substitution. I highly suggest finding the discriminant first so you have a single value to plug back into the equation. All right, I think that is it for this side of the notes. Go ahead and finish these 3 on the bottom. These get a little bit tricky with labeling your A, B, and C values. Go ahead and finish these 3 on the bottom. Answer key for that will be posted on the board. That's it.